Man skal være modig. Man skal ture og gøre nogle ting, som er anderledes.
En del af det at være leder er også at være komfortabel med at være ude på noget lidt dybt vand.
Man kan ikke tage business for givet længere. Hvis ting kan gøres lettere og nemmere, så sker det.
Vi bruger rigtig meget tid på at kigge på, hvad er det, der er brug for i morgendagen. Hvad er det, der trigger os?
Vi skal være så dygtige til at drible med bolden, altså vores daglige arbejde, at vi kan kigge op, og vi kan se, hvad muligheder er der foran.
Jeg er helt overbevist om, at de løsninger, man finder ved at prøve sig frem og have mod til det, den tror jeg på skaber meget mere værdi for en virksomhed. Det kan godt være, at det er på en lidt længere bane.
Når vi tester nogle nye maskiner her hos os, så er det som regel mig, som normalvis ikke arbejder med maskinerne, som gør det, eller en af vores andre administrative medarbejdere. Fordi så kommer der bare nogle umiddelbare reaktioner på det, som en rutineret tekniker måske ikke vil se.
Det er sjovt og lærerigt at tage den snoede sti.
Der synes jeg godt, man kan sammenligne med, at folk, der rejser over Atlanten, det er jo enormt usikkert, men de har et mål, de har en drøm, og de har et kompas med sig. Så de kan navigere efter det. De skal nok komme derover, men der kan jo ske alt muligt undervejs. Det er ikke sikkert, at de lige kan sejle på en kurs derover. Så må de jo have sanserne ude og så rette ind.
Altså, der er slet ingen tvivl om, at de kreative, de bliver meget mere effektive, når man arbejder med designtænkning. For mig at se, så er designtænkning, det er jo en måde, hvorpå man får innovation gjort effektivt. Fordi innovation i bund og grund først er innovation, når der er skabt et resultat.
Mennesket og nye teknologier er ikke nødvendigvis et modsætningsforhold. Jeg tror i virkeligheden, at fordi teknologien er blevet så meget mere udbredt, der er teknologi som en del af vores allesammens tilværelse, der er meget, meget få mennesker i dag, som ikke på en eller anden måde er i berøring med teknologi. I dag er det alle, der skal kunne selvbetjene sig selv, så derfor bliver kravene til teknologi også større.
Hvis vi skal købe nyt udstyr til produktionen, så skal vi tage udgangspunkt i de mennesker, der skal håndtere det her nye udstyr. Det, som design kan, det er lige præcis, at man husker, at mennesket kommer før alt. Og det bliver faktisk ikke bedre end de mennesker, der skal betjene det.
Jeg tror, det er et vilkår, at man er komfortabel med det og være ukomfortabel. Så for mig handler det ikke om usikkerhed eller andre ting. Det handler om at tro på det, vi stræber efter, og det, vi bygger sammen.
Det ukendte er også muligheder, fordi at man ved ikke, hvordan verden kunne være.
Why are we transporting? How are we transporting? And that opens the space for opportunities and threats for you, depending on who you are, what you're doing, what change you are seeing, and what you're ready to do. Here's another system that is ripe for innovation. What are we going to do about it with us, who are growing older, and as we're growing older and live longer, we will have more diseases. What are we doing with healthcare? This is a big system with a lot of challenges, a lot of need to rethink from the existing solutions. We will need solutions like this with remote diagnostics, but that's just a little piece of it. A lot of different innovations and challenging of what values do we create and how is required for the system. Here is an industry that already went through system change and structural change. And it was not driven by the incumbents. This is what it used to look like a couple of years ago. And you had this traditional value chain thinking that dominated this business, with some very large incumbents who dominated the scene, had the artists contracted, the distribution channels, pushed the content out on the market, and had a very powerful situation. then it changed. This is not change that was driven by the existing players, the incumbents. This was driven by new actors, but it was also driven by some powerful forces in the business context, in the greater environment. New technologies, not new technology, but new technologies. New consumer behavior, turbulently coming in from other fields, with consumers ready to share and giving priority to access rather than owning. So turbulence coming in from other fields, and also new business models, and a lower legitimacy for IP. You remember the Napsters, right? And in the beginning, Napsters were the first on this picture. These were seen as jokes by the incumbents. The first signs of change at the fringes of the system was seen as jokes and contested by the incumbents. We later on worked with the publishing industry, with one of the largest publishing houses in the world, or holding companies for publishing, and they were able to make a far better transition into the digital space and actually won against Amazon, which could have been one of the players that would be hitting their traditional industry here. Music industry didn't cope well with this change. And the big change then came when they changed gradually the business models, and they could team up with some of the incumbents. So some of the new players could team up with some of the incumbents. So what are the jokes that you consider jokes in your fields today? Are you starting to see some teaming up with some of the jokes? In a big study of strategies that failed, these were the main reasons. And you can see that the top reason was misleading prejudgments. That means they had the wrong assumptions about the business that they were in. They assumed one thing about the system, but the system was changing. And their lens didn't allow them to recognize the change in time. So let's talk about lenses. I mean, most of us are trained to look at the world like this. If we're a management team in a high-rise on the 9th Avenue, this is our view of the world. And we're looking out, and we're trained to look at this space here, which has the most granularity. We focus on what we know, not on the blurry stuff out here, you know, the kind of drivers that could possibly affect this. So we don't like to spend time thinking of low legitimacy for IP, new technologies, new consumer behavior that in a systemic way, and new actors could change our business. We like this zone here. And our main strategy tool, the most popular strategy tool, the value chain, is very good for that space. And most of us are trained to use this and to use it as a lens to understand our business. And it says that we have activities that are linked linearly in a chain that goes like this, and then we add value in layers of each activity, and the value is a result of historical activities in the chain. And then in the end, you don't see a layer, right? Because the view of the consumer, or the end customer, if it's B2B, is that it consumes value, right? You destroy the car at the end. The game here, and strategy here, is to defend a position. It's a power game. So it's a game about fencing off the others in the system, and it's a zero-sum game. Of course, I'm making kind of a caricature of it, but this is the essence here. And competition is the key. This is competitive strategy. Winning against others. It's very good for stable business environments where you have an incumbent and dominant role. It's not very good for TUNA environments, what we in Oxford called TUNA environments. So environments where you had a lot of turbulence, so sharing economy is starting to go into my space as well, or a lot of uncertainty, big decisions, be it Brexit or Trump's being elected, or be it big regulations that have not been decided yet and can have big impacts on our industry, or novelty, like machine learning, artificial intelligence. We simply have not been in that space yet. Or ambiguity, where it depends on who you're asking what's happening here. We'll see different things and pay attention to different things in it. And these kinds of environment, it's not helpful to use as the only lens, at least, the value chain. The value chain is a construct. It was invented, if you like, 1980. It's not older than that. But it's very sticky. It's very pleasing to think of. It's simplifying in a very nice way. But it's also dangerous because it limits your thinking about the system that you're in. It's not that tree that you climb up in to look far. So there are other strategy lenses. And one that it's gaining ground is system thinking in strategy. Or I call it here networked strategy. Here, the attention is not on the chain of activities, but you focus on, by supplying this product, what is the value that you can create with that? So the value is not in the car, the value is in what you can do with the car. And if you understand that, you can also look at what are other things and activities and actors that can provide that kind of value, and how can you leverage more on that value? So the value is really in the interaction of using and interacting with other actors. And it's a bigger space, it's a bigger field. So if you're looking at the mobility field, you have different actors in here that you don't see as a car producer if you consider yourself as strictly a car producer. And the view of a customer is different here. Value is not the result of historical activities. Of course, you're offering something, but the value of that will ultimately be decided based on how useful that is to someone. And different things will have different values for different people or different actors. And the one that understand that better than others, just as the one that understand risks better than others, excel in business. And in a system, it's all about who can I get to collaborate with me to create better solutions? And how can I create better values by understanding this context, be it the mobility context, for instance? How can I deploy resources to enable better interactions and collaborate with others doing that? An example, this is a medical technology supplier, and they had this fantastic piece of MRI scanner that was had this slight problem, and that it made a big bleep on the healthcare administrator's budget because it's very, very costly. So they had this challenge to start to look at, so what are the values that we're contributing to in the system? So what they did, and they had internally, they had this strong dominant value around what was seen as the most important features of the offering were the technical performance in it, right? The efficiency of and the possibility to generate accurate imaging and so forth. So what they did was that they went into the system of use and mapped out what are the key stakeholders here, and what are the values that they value. What is it that matters to them? And they found three things that were the critical system values, not the product value, system values, and that was quality of care, cost, and access. So they saw, we need to show that we can improve quality of care, cost, and access. Now, to do that, it's not just a marketing jargon to succeed in that. You actually have to improve in the system. And to do that, they had to bring on new capabilities as well. So they set out ambitions on improving in these 3 areas, and then they looked at technology required. They had the imaging and diagnostics technology. They didn't have the software system. So they partnered up with Microsoft and software companies that had that ability to use data in the system, information in the system about care. And they had the imaging information, but they needed more information about care, how the imaging information was used, how that led to better therapies. So they teamed up with some of the world's best clinical healthcare clinics to develop this and to have access to their customer databases, so patient databases. And then they worked with processes, so you need processes as well, the medical protocols to operate this, but also how do you manage care in the system? And there's a lot of inefficiency in the care systems, and a lot of sort of basic things like waiting times and scheduling and things like that, that approves or that it takes down the access for people in the systems. Not everything to be improved in the system is a matter of high-tech solutions to get to it. And then they needed people that could work with this. And they also needed, compared to what they already had, they had needed more doctors, so they had to hire that. And they could bring in experienced consultants and managers who were good at process cracking from other parts of their organization. So they could create leverage on what they were already good at, but translated that to a system level, to system solutions. So they looked at what they're good at, look at what they need to complement. Collaboration is key to succeed in that if you're working on a global scale. So collaborative strategy is much more important than competitive strategy if you're turning into an outcomes business and solutions business. That's systems. Let's look at how you can deploy design thinking with systems thinking. This is a basic model of a creative process, of a design process. You have a good assessment of what business are you in. What is not only what we're providing today, but what's the system that we're part of. You're then exploring what business could we be in. And there's good methodology for that accessible from the design domain. Not only looking at how might that bigger system develop and into futures, but what is the system if we define it as a mobility system or a retail access system? Different actors. And then lastly, evaluate what business should we be in. And then look at how to realize the change from it. But not starting here. We all have to go into digital, or we have to go into big data, where it might be. But an assessment of the situation right now, the biggest system right now. What is underattended? Think of the mapping that they did in the medical technology case. So what is valued in the system? What is underattended? What is overattended? What are sleeping resources in that system? And I'll give you a case here of someone who went through this process, and it's a company that's been in the media last week, but this is a case from very recent years, and it's the truck, bus, and transport solutions company Scania. They mapped out the bigger system that they were part of for a part of their business. And you can see what is blue here is Scania. And what is white here, white boxes, are other players in the system. It's a bit illustrated like a chain, I'll give you that, but it's in order to be able to sell it internally, right? But it mapped out also a bigger part of the system that they were not part of. And in this picture here, this doesn't have so much granularity, but there is also more granularity there. They did this to stress test their existing strategies. So they mapped out the system, and then they used scenarios to explore how could this system be changing? So future scenarios of what could our business segments look like? How could this system be changing over 20 years? They came to a conclusion that for two important segments, there were big drivers to start to attend to the waste here in this system, which is in the transportation. Not in this part of the system. In this part of the system, which is their traditional part of the system, there would be more commoditization. But there's so much more efficiency gains in the system here to be captured and to be the waste to be minimized, that it's marginally important to have a slightly more efficient engine, if you like. So they set up a new company, a prototype of a new company outside of Scania called LOGISTIC. Just recent, a few years ago, and they started to experiment on taking out waste in this part of the system here. They're not a truck company, LOGISTIC. They're not under that brand, Scania. And they can earn money by taking out trucks from a system. They can also earn money by bringing in more efficient trucks to the system. But they work with minimizing waste in the system. And they collaborate with other existing players in the system. And the efficiency gains that they make, they share with the others in the system. Collaborative strategy. So this is an example of a forestry company. Their traditional customers are here. They started working with the forestry company, which has seasonal variations. The pulp mill hill, they don't like seasonal variations. They want a steady process flow. The paper mill here has more of demand fluctuations. So they work with not only, and I will not go into the details here, but they work with not only looking at specific A to B flows, but they look at different parts of the system where there is waste. Where are the bottlenecks? Also within, so in warehousing, and to other suppliers into the system as well. And then design, point out where the bottlenecks are, design and be able to operate a business that operates the system more effectively. And when doing that, they're building on distinct competences, what they're good at, not core competences. It's not one thing they're good at. And it's certainly not trucks. What is it that they're good at? They're good at road transportation. And they're also good at very modular products and production systems. They're by far the most modular, both product and production system, which is very cost effective. And then they're very good at lean. And they translated this. So they created leverage on what they were good at. They translated this into what does that mean into a system of how we set up our business in the system that takes out waste from that system. And then they had to add business design, which was not part of the system. Lastly, they're also using a design approach for how they're realizing this. So they're guided by this overall vision of sustainable logistics systems. But then they prototype, they pilot in different parts of the world. It's still so that main Scania is what we're looking at as Scania. But they're piloting this on the side as well. They're doing other experiments like that on the side as well. Lastly, just to invite you to some reflections. Are your environments stable environments? Or are they TUNA environments? Or are they starting to show signs of that? What are your strategy lenses? Is value chain the dogma in your company? Or do you also use more explorative lenses like the system lenses? Do you focus on competitive strategy or also on collaborative strategy? In collaborative strategy, it's also important to compete, but you collaborate in order to be able to compete. And do you understand what different actors value? What matters to them? And lastly, can you create leverage on your distinct competences in a system business? Thank you.